everybody, and welcome to this video on safe flexibility. This is going to be the first in a series, and I know you all want to get to the practical ones and find out how to get those legs higher, but we need to be sure that we're doing this safely. Now, stretching is not just about getting your legs higher than they already are. There are lots of other reasons that we stretch, and you really need to refine down what your goals are before you decide which stretches are appropriate for you. So this is kind of like making a recipe. So what we're going to do in this video series is give you some ingredients from which you can create a recipe for your given situation on a given day for a given goal or target. And just remember that stretching is very, very individual. You don't have the body of the person next to you. What they're doing for their stretching may not be right for you. So this is about empowering you to really understand your own body and therefore make a recipe, a little strategy that's appropriate for you. It's well worth checking out other videos on looking at your hip joints, if that's what you're wanting to stretch. Look at the video on muscles so that you know what it is that you're targeting with your stretching, because we need to answer these 4 questions before we can even begin to decide how to start our flexibility program. So you want to know why you are stretching, and you might be like, well, duh, I want to get my legs higher, right? Every dancer wants to, but there are other reasons that you might want to be stretching, and we're going to look at those. You want to know, what are you stretching? Is it a muscle that you're targeting? Which particular muscle? And be specific. There are so many dancers that are doing stretches that they think are targeting, say, their hamstrings, and they're not. So we need to be sure about what we're targeting. We also want to look at when, and that's about the timing of stretches and what sequence and frequency of stretches you need to do to achieve the target you've set. And then finally, we get to the how we're going to stretch, and you're going to see those in the practical videos, but you really need to revisit this video over and over again to make sure that you're being specific about what you want to get to and what is the best and safest route to get there. Okay. So if we're ready, we're going to dive in and look at that first question. Why are we stretching? Improve flexibility. That's what most people would think of when they're looking at flexibility training. I can get my leg this high and I want to get it up here. Okay, that's one goal we might be looking at. However, for some people who are already super flexible, if you are a hypermobile person, you might want to be more focusing on your strength and conditioning training. And there is no stretch program in the world that does not go hand in hand with a strength and conditioning training. We need to do the two together. I'm going to cover that in a separate video series. But if you're already flexible, or you don't want to particularly focus on increasing flexibility in specific muscle groups, you might want to just maintain it. Say you've done a hard class or performance and things have tightened up, and you just want to stretch to get yourself back to where you started, rather than going to the new range of movement with stretching. So that's called maintaining the flexibility. Now, other things we want to be considering: improving the blood flow. So all our muscles require blood to operate, right? The blood brings the oxygen, which is the fuel source for muscle activation. And if you go and look at the video on muscles, you'll see that the blood vessels run through the muscle tissue, through the fibers, along the fibers. So if your muscles are tight, they're actually restricting the blood flow in. So you're actually restricting your fuel supply. Similarly, the drainage channels also run through those muscle fibers. If you think of a muscle like an engine, it's got a fuel supply coming in, there's a combustion process that creates the energy for the muscle to fire, and then waste products are produced. And some of those are in liquid form, so they need to drain out. So again, if your muscle is particularly tight, then your drainage is not going to be good. If you've ever had that, what we call delayed onset muscle soreness, right? When your muscles are sore the next day, that's often because those waste products are still stuck in the muscle and they weren't cleaned out after exercise. So improving drainage is really important. Improving signaling. Now, this is something that's often a little bit new to people. The muscles require the signal from the nerves. They provide the electrical signal to tell the muscle to contract. And there is no movement you do ever that involves one muscle, right? Lots of muscles have to work together in a coordinated way to produce that movement. If you think of muscles like instruments in an orchestra, and the nervous system is like the conductor that's going to create a nice coordinated firing sequence of those muscles to produce a particular movement. If one of those muscles say we've got 6 muscles that are involved in a particular movement, and one of them's tight, then the sequence of firing that's been set up for that movement to occur is now not going to work as well because one of the muscles is not playing its part. Therefore, we need to make sure that we've got good signaling, good coordination for all these muscles to operate together. If we don't, that can actually increase your injury risk. Okay, and then finally, reducing injury risk. That's one of the reasons. When muscles are tight, think of your hamstrings, for instance. If your hamstrings are feeling a bit tight on a given day and then you go and do that big old whacking kick and there's not enough elasticity in that muscle, then we've got potential for injury. So when we are doing our maintenance stretching for our muscles, we are bringing down that injury risk. Really, really important. So those are some of the questions you need to start asking yourself. Again, creating that little recipe of what do I need at the other end in terms of a stretching strategy to meet these particular goals. Okay, that was our why. Now we move on to what are we stretching? We've got various different soft tissues in the body. There's a video called Meet Your Soft Tissues that will take you through, if you don't know the difference between a ligament and a tendon, for instance. Go and watch that video and that'll give you an idea of what the jobs are of all these different tissues and what properties they have in terms of elasticity or stretch ability, and whether we actually want to be stretching those particular tissues. So I'm going to take you through these, and starting with those ligaments. Do we want to be stretching our ligaments? I would say the answer to that is no. So ligaments are like soft tissue straps, if you like, that occur wherever you've got a bone meeting another bone at a joint. Then the ligaments are there to provide what we call the passive stability, or the joint stability around that where those two bones are meeting. They are allowing some range of movement, but they're limiting you from taking that joint too far and damaging it. Okay, they're there as a safety mechanism. They're not elastic like a muscle is, for instance. You know, muscles can stretch and contract. Ligaments don't have that same elasticity. They have a little bit of elastic fiber in there, but very little. They have what's called plastic properties. So they're more like a piece of chewing gum. You know, if you stretch that, there's no recoil, right? Not like a rubber band where you let it go and it'll ping back. If you are doing long stretches, and we're going to talk about timing in a moment, anything that's beyond really sort of 60 seconds in a stretch, you're really starting to drop into those ligaments. If you do that for prolonged periods of time, those of you who like to sit in second position, leaning on your hands, watching TV, you know who you are, you're getting into your ligaments and you're putting a prolonged stretch there, and you're destabilizing those hip joints in that instance. So you're making that underlying joint vulnerable. You might get away with that for a while, but I'm talking to your future self, and I'm taking care of your future self. Your future self will thank you for not blowing out your ligaments when you're in your younger years, because you need these joints to be lasting you a lifetime. Okay, so that was our ligaments. So we really don't want to be stretching so that we're dropping into the ligaments. Muscles, yes. Okay, these are the elastic contractile tissues. They can contract and become shortened, and they can stretch and become lengthened, and they are very receptive to stretching. This is really where we're going to be getting those gains in flexibility we're looking for, and also we're going to increase the power. If a muscle is short and tight, it's actually weak, And we'll see that as you go through a lot of these different videos, you'll see how when muscles are kind of locked up, they're not firing, and therefore we're getting issues with the particular movements or alignment control issues. So when we're stretching our muscles, we're actually, again, reducing that injury risk. We want to keep them nice and juicy and elastic. And we all know when you've done a hard class or you're overworking particular muscles, they'll start to get thicker and less stretchy. So we need to be mindful about keeping that nice, soft elasticity in our muscles. Okay, tendons. Do we want to be, or can we even? So I've done a meh for that one. Tendons do have some elastic fibers, a little bit more than ligaments, but nowhere near what we have as muscles. Tendons are there to act as more like a rope-like structure that connects the muscle fiber to the bone. So if they were stretchy, again, we'd be wobbling around all over the place. Really, when we're talking about, lots of people will say, oh, I've got a tight Achilles tendon. Can the tendon actually be tight? It can't actually contract. So what's really happening is that the attached muscles, so in the case of the Achilles, the picture I've got there, is that it's the calf muscles above that Achilles that are increasing the tensile force through the tendon. So if the muscle's tight, the tendon is less forgiving. Therefore, again, we really want to be directing the stretch to the muscle rather than the tendon. There are some specific tendon stretches we can do, really particularly around injury rehabilitation, but those you want to be doing really under professional guidance, because you need to use quite a lot of force with tendons and you need to be mindful and careful about how you're doing that. So really we're not particularly targeting the tendons other than by default because we're addressing the attached muscle to that tendon. Similarly with fascia. So again, fascia, really you need to go, I'm doing a whole video on fascia because it's such an extraordinary tissue. And again, it doesn't have contractile properties like a muscle does. It cannot be short and tight in that sense. Fascia changes its consistency under friction and load. People are always saying to me, I've got a tight IT band. Really? Your IT band's fascial structure can't actually contract and be tight. It's thickened itself, and you'll hear me say this a lot through all the videos, your body doesn't do things to spite you. Okay, it's thickened itself for a reason, and typically that's because there's maybe a bit of pelvic instability that's allowing too much load to slop sideways every time you stand on one leg. You know who you are, who's sitting to one hip when you're on one leg. There's more load going in, the tissue will thicken itself under load. So when we're looking at fascia, we're really looking at what are we doing to load it, stop doing that, and it won't need to thicken itself, okay? So we're looking really, again, at the why there. We always need to be coming back to why has it done that. So it really doesn't stretch like muscle. Go and watch the fascia video if you want to know more about that. It really responds better to hands-on release techniques, and I'll show you those in the fascial videos. But you've got to address that underlying biomechanical cause, alignment cause that is causing that fascia to do what it's doing. All right, that moves us on to when are we stretching? Now, when we're doing deep stretches, and we kind of categorize a deep stretch as a stretch that is lasting longer than, say, 20 seconds, okay? Really, we're looking, when we're doing any sort of stretches, we're really looking at a sort of 30 to 60 second window. Anything longer than 20 seconds, we kind of call that a deep stretch. We only want to be doing those after exercise or at the end of the day when you've finished exercising for the day. Now, for a lot of dancers, this will blow your mind because we were all trained, I was trained as well, before you start class, everyone's stretching. Everyone thinks a warm-up is sitting in splits, right? Or sitting here with your legs in second and hanging out in these long stretches. The science on muscle physiology has moved on leaps and bounds since the 100, 200 years of our dance technique training. And we now know that when you do deep, prolonged stretches, i.e. longer than 20 seconds, what you're really doing is kind of putting the muscles to sleep. You know, they're kind of going, oh yeah, I'm really chilled out now. Yeah, this is great. And then you go, right, now we're going to jump across the room. And they're like, what? It actually increases your injury risk. It depowers the muscle. We lose some of that signaling and coordination we talked about. So we do not, dancers, want to be stretching, doing long stretches before class. I'm going to do a whole series on how you should warm up. And deep stretches are not a part of it. If a muscle is tight before you're starting exercise and you want it to loosen up, you're going to use your hands, you're going to rub it, get blood flow into the tissue. Stretches squeeze out a lot of the blood as you're stretching. So really not part, and us ballet dancers that we're all trained, after you've done bar, then you do your long stretches before you come in the middle. I'm afraid we have to move on, okay? We have to move on. We have to keep up to date. So you want to stretch at the end of the class, but if you're running to another class or running into performance, you haven't finished yet. Don't turn your muscles off before you need them to work. If you still need them to work, stretches that are less than 20 seconds you can do just to get a little relief. Use your hands to release the muscles up. Save your deep stretches for the end of the day or after your last class or performance. Quick stretches, so these are the ones we just mentioned, less than 20 seconds. Those you can do before or during class. So if you're doing lots of jumps and you're like, oh, I just want to do a quick little stretch out of those calf muscles, that's okay as long as it's less than 20 seconds. Only stretch when the muscles are warm, okay? So we need to make sure that the temperature is right, that we've got blood flow in the tissues. Again, if you put an aggressive deep stretch into a cold muscle, it's not going to receive that stretch well, and it could even get damaged by that. So make sure we're warmed up. So after you've done class, what I always say, because I always get the excuse, oh, I never have time after class, I've got to run to the work and then I've got to run to this, or I've got to catch the last train after performance, I don't have time to do my stretching then. Okay, do it before you go to bed, but have a warm shower or bath so you warm the muscles up, then you do your stretches before you go to bed. Don't carry today's tension into tomorrow, okay? Then the timing of stretches, we're going to get into that in a bit more detail when we do the practical session. But we're looking at how long are you holding that stretch, how many times do you repeat that stretch, how many times do you repeat those sequence of repeated stretches, right? What's the little kind of program that you're going to put together, and we'll talk about that coming up. All right. Little bit on types of stretches. Again, this will become more obvious when we get into the practical sessions. There are many, 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 many different ways that we can stretch muscles. These are just some of them. We can't cover them all, but I'm just going to give you the sort of basic, simple ones that are useful to you. If you're working with a healthcare provider who's helping you with an injury recovery, they might do some more complex stretching with you. But these are the sort of nice, simple ones that you can do for yourself. So the one that we're all most familiar with is the static or passive stretch. So that's the one where you get yourself into the desired position to stretch whichever muscle you're aiming at, and then you hold it there under your own body weight or under gravity. Okay, so that would be a static or passive stretch. The dynamic or kinetic stretches, we're doing that a lot in class. Every time, say, you kick your leg, you are, by definition, stretching some of those muscles as the leg is going up, but they're also having to fire and at that position. That's kind of the difference with us as dancers, is that we don't just want to be super, super flexible. We need to, yes, kick our leg quite high, but we also need to be able to activate the muscles at that height. One of the rules we always talk about when we're looking at flexibility is however high you can kick your leg, you really need to be able to control it in that position. So if you can whack your leg all the way up to your ear, but you can only kind of hold it around 90 degrees quivering, right? The difference between where you can control it and where you can kick it is your injury risk window, okay? This is unsupported flexibility, and the joints are vulnerable there. So ideally, we want to be creating the strength as we get that increase in flexibility. So if you're looking to increase your flexibility, you need to strengthen as you go so that you've always got that flexibility under control. For our hypermobile dancers who are made of rubber bands. I'm one of those. We need to do a lot of strength training before we can start to think about getting into improving flexibility, if that's even required. Active release, so these are techniques, there are always those muscles that you can't get at, right? You just can't angle yourself to get at that muscle, particularly like the small muscles in the lower leg, for instance, on the front of the shin. The ones that we can't get ourselves in a position to stretch, we can actually use what we call an active release, where we're using a hands-on approach to direct and target the stretch to the area without bending and contorting ourselves into strange positions. That will become more clear when we do the practical ones, and we'll demonstrate how to do that. So that's just some of the types of stretches we might be covering. Now, cautions to stretches. Really need to be mindful. You need to be very, very kind to yourself when you are stretching. Hypermobility. If you can already do that with your legs, do you need any more flexibility in that hip? Do you perhaps need more control there? And that's a very good picture demonstration of someone that's pressing into the ligaments of the hip. I would be very, very worried about what's going on with the hip joint with a dancer that's pressing into those stretches like that. Similarly, forceful stretches. We should never be using force. We need to use good technique to stretch, be refined and intelligent. If you're refined and intelligent, you don't need force, and you'll actually get much better gains by not forcing. Muscles have a built-in defense mechanism, and if you force them into a position with a rushed stretch or a bounce stretch, the muscle will actually contract against it as a defense mechanism. And if you push through a contracting muscle, you're going to damage it. So we must be mindful. Injury. If you are addressing an injury, particularly if you've got a joint issue, what can often happen is we get muscle guarding or splinting around an injured joint. It might be protecting that joint. So you don't want to just be going in and stretching out that muscle if it's actually doing something to protect you. So if you have an injury, work with a healthcare provider to get the best advice on how to deal with that. Pain. Your stretches should not be painful. We want to take them to that point where they're just sweetening up a little bit and you're like, ooh, that's just feeling that, but not pushing through to pain. What you do is you wait at that little pain barrier and then come off it, and when you return to it, you'll be able to go a bit further. You don't push through the pain. Pain's an alarm response, it's there for a reason. Similarly, pins and needles, tingling, numbness, people saying, whenever I stretch my hamstrings, my foot goes numb. Stop, okay? This means there's a nerve involved. We've got nerve involvement in that. We do not want to be aggravating our nerves or trapping our nerves as we're doing our stretches. So make sure that if there's any of those symptoms coming in, make sure you consult a healthcare provider. Age appropriate, okay? I'm going to do again a video on growing phase. If you are in a growth phase as a young dancer, the ends of your bones are not bone. They are still soft tissue. They're cartilage-like substance because that's what's growing. Our muscles and tendons are attaching into those points. If you are forcefully stretching, you are pulling on those end plates of the bone. They can get very inflamed and sore. So really we need to be doing more kind of hands-on work for our younger dancers to release any muscle tensions, but not doing deep forceful stretches. But I'll do a separate video on our growing phases. Okay, how are we stretching? Again, this is going to come more into focus as we get into the practical, but if we're doing those before or during exercise, as we mentioned, less than 15 seconds, use your hands to get the blood flowing. If we're wanting to maintain flexibility, i.e. you just want to undo today's tension and go back to where you started, a 30 to 60 second static stretch per muscle or muscle group after your exercise or after strength training as well will be adequate for that. But you don't necessarily need to do many repetitions for that. That's just going to undo a bit of today's tension. If we're wanting to increase flexibility, then you need to be more structured about how you do that. We're still going to do those 30 to 60 second static stretches, but you need to do 3 to 5 repetitions on each muscle, and you need to repeat that whole sequence 3 to 5 times per week. And you need to be disciplined about that and have that routine going in order that you end up increasing your flexibility. So that's the sequence you'll be looking at if that's your goal, and we'll talk about that when we're doing the practicals. As I mentioned, always strengthen when you're stretching. So stretch what you strengthen and strengthen what you stretch, okay? They have to go hand in hand. Unsupported flexibility is a risk for injury. And then another piece we need to be looking at is balance. There are a lot of receptors in all these soft tissues that help us in our balance and control. And the fancy word for that is proprioception. Again, there'll be a whole video on balance and proprioception. But as you're changing the length of the muscle with your stretching program, then you're altering the parameters around which your balance has been organized. So you need to be doing some balance training in order to offset any changes that you're making as you're addressing muscle tone. So strength training and balance training have to be a part of your stretching program. Okay. That was a lot of information. You might want to watch this video a few times to get yourself familiar with all of this. If you're just diving straight into the practical videos, you're not necessarily going to have all the information you need to make intelligent choices about your stretching. But this whole video series is all about empowering you to be absolutely your best advocate when it comes to stretching. You're not stretching anyone else's body. You have the body you have. Make sure what you're doing is the best choice for you. Okay, I hope you found that helpful, and I'll see you in the practical videos.